The Georgia Election Board has a bunch of new requirements that were passed by the Georgia legislature regarding voting in upcoming elections. After the 2020 election, they wanted to put in measures to make it so individuals could either no longer complain about voter fraud or to tamp down on any voter fraud that might have potentially happened. At this point, there is little evidence supporting that theory. However, looking at it, the New York Times recently posted an issue going through about 15 points in their election bill that we're going to do a breakdown today to determine whether Georgia is actually suppressing votes or whether this is just political theater. Hint, if you know anything about the channel, we're going to be leaning towards political theater. But this is your April 5th Not So News update. Like and subscribe if you're looking for daily news content, and let's dive on in. Starting us off, we have the infamous New York Times article, What the Georgia's Voting Law Really Does. In it, they've listed off the following points, and we're going to literally go through these one by one to determine how legitimate they are towards voter suppression or not. So the first one, voters will have less time to request absentee ballots. This is from page 38 of the Georgia bill. Not earlier than 78 days or less than 11 days prior to the date of the primary or election or runoff of either in which the elector desires to vote, any absentee elector may make either by mail, by transmission, by electric transmission, etc., an application official ballot of the elector's precinct to be voted as such primary election or runoff. Essentially what's going on is that the used to allow you to request an absentee ballot 180 days, and they've determined that 78 days is more reasonable. 180 days notably is 6 months before an election. Just for reference, some of the primaries are still going on at that time. You don't even know who's on the ballot. I think it's absolutely ludicrous that they even allowed absentee ballots to be requested that early on. Making it 80 days is still a little under 3 months before an election. As far as I'm concerned, this has no influence on an election whatsoever, and if anything, makes it so your ballot is going to be more valid. It makes it so that they don't need to resend out a ballot after you voted for something that's been taken off the ballot. This just makes sense. Notably, they didn't change the less than date for this, which was being commented about, as that would encourage people to go to in-person voting. But as far as I'm concerned, this absolutely has no play when it comes to voter suppression. There are strict new ID requirements for absentee ballots. This is notably for absentee ballots. You are now requested to provide a copy of ID. I'm not going to read through all of it, but in general, I think the one thing that's worth looking at is the different voter ID laws that other states have. Majority of other states already have some type of voter ID, and this is actually the first time Georgia's being put in this. Georgia's being put in this category called a strict photo ID, and there are only about 6 states here now: Georgia, Indiana, Kansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Wisconsin. Other strict IDs include Arizona, North Dakota, and Ohio, but there's also another 20-ish states here that have what's classified as non-strict voter ID, which essentially just means that you're asked to provide the ID afterwards if it's considered suspicious, and you do have the typical sign off. Also looking at the I forgot to mention when we were looking at the early voter access, if you look at it, most states already only range in the 5 days to roughly 55 days. I think Alabama has 55 days. I see as the furthest ahead. So Georgia being at 180 days was absolutely insane when it came to doing early voting. Sorry, I forgot to mention that point when we're talking about it. It is now illegal for election officials to mail out absentee ballot applications to all voters. A blank application for an absentee ballot shall be made available online by the Secretary of State and each election superintendent and registrar, but neither the Secretary of State, election superintendent, board of registrars, other government entity, nor employees of agent thereof shall send absentee ballot applications directly to any elector except upon request of such elector or a relative authorized to request an absentee ballot for such elector. No person or entity other than a relative authorized to request an absentee ballot for such elector, or a single person signing and as assisting an illiterate or a physically disabled elector shall send any elector an absentee ballot application that is pre-filled with the elector's required information set forth in this subparagraph. Essentially what happened here is, as a result of coronavirus, they determined that they wanted everyone to have the opportunity to request an absentee ballot. They're essentially saying that it's going back to the old policy, which was the policy before COVID, of saying that you had to request an absentee ballot. This is the process used, as far as I know, in every single state besides California, I think. I know at least here in Maryland that you have to request an absentee ballot, and most states work that way. So unless you're going to say most states are, under voter suppression, I don't think this is a genuine issue. Drop boxes still exist, but barely. A board of registrars or absentee ballot clerks may establish additional drop boxes, but may only establish additional drop boxes totaling the lesser of either one drop box for every 100,000 active registered voters in the county, or the number of advanced voting locations in the county. Any additional drop boxes shall be evenly geographically distributed. Essentially, they're complaining that in 2020 there were 94 drop boxes, and now it's 23 drop boxes. What this fails to mention, though, is this was the policy before COVID. If you look at the AJC, ballot drop boxes approved for Georgia voting during coronavirus, and their justification was the election board voted unanimously Wednesday to allow Georgia voters to turn in their absentee ballots at drop boxes as an option that avoids human contact during the coronavirus pandemic. The additional drop boxes were only there as a result of coronavirus. They were not intended to be long-term solutions for the voting. There were a lot of rules that were changed in a lot of states regarding 2020 elections, specifically around coronavirus, and those measures shouldn't be expected to stay unless they're voted on. A similar one of these measures is these mobile voting centers. The New York Times calls them a RV where you can vote. The superintendent of a county or the governing authority of a municipality shall have the discretion to procure or provide portable or movable polling facilities of adequate size for any precinct, provided, however, these buses and other readily movable facilities shall only be used in emergencies declared by the governor to supplement the capability of the polling place where the emergency circumstance occurred. Essentially, what they're saying is that if you want to have some type of special system, you need to get it approved by essentially there being some type of emergency going on. Once again, if we look here at Fulton County, they look at the mobile voting centers that were part of 2020. The mobile voting units are just one of the many improvements that Fulton County has made to the election process over the last several months, in addition to more voting sites, equipment, and poll workers. The county's new Fulton City Ads is another improvement, putting information in the palm of voter hand with information, early voting, and election day polling sites, drop boxes, and election results. The Fulton Vote apps is available now in the Apple App Store, etc., etc. Essentially, these were things passed just in the last 2020 election that they determined were a result for coronavirus. These were not intended to be long-term solutions. So let's look at the next one. Early voting is expanded in a lot of small counties, but probably not in more populous ones. Essentially, what they were just doing with this is that they changed language that specifically said voting shall be conducted during normal business hours to explicitly say beginning at 9 and ending at 5 p.m. Essentially, they were just making a clarification on what normal business hours are. If you think that's a legitimate criticism, I don't think you actually read the bill. This portion has actually been getting a lot of news as Joe Biden got a for Pinocchio fact check for saying that they were limiting when people could vote during the day, and it's just absolutely not true. If anything, they were expanding it because they then forced hours to be 7 to 7 when they're closer to the actual election day. The next one, this one has also been getting a ton of attention. Offering food or water to voters waiting in line now risks misdemeanor charges. And essentially, this is just the giant complaint that's been going on regarding food and water being given. No person shall solicit votes in any manner or by any means or method, nor shall any person distribute or display any campaign material, or shall any person give, offer to give, or participate in the giving of any money or gifts, including but not limited to food or drink, to an elector nor shall any person solicit signatures for any petition, nor shall any person other than election officials discharging their duties establish or set up any tables or booths on any day in which ballots are being cast within 150 feet of the outer edge of any building, within any polling place, or within 25 feet of any voters standing in line to vote at any polling place. Essentially, what's going on here is most states already have limitations to people being able to campaign at voting spots. You'll see that there's normally a ton of signs, at the school that you vote for, and essentially what they're saying is that in addition to you not being able to have signs out there, you're not allowed to hand out things like water or Gatorade or whatever to be promoting. Snopes fact checked, looks into this specifically, and they highlight what the new language that's being given. So before, the language just said, nor shall any person distribute or display any campaign material, nor shall any person solicit signatures. And the new portion of this bill is saying that nor shall any person give, offer to give, or participate in the giving of money or gifts, including but not limited to food and drink, to an elector. They are classifying that the food and drink is in the same category as the money or gifts. They are not attacking election officials that want to give you a water because you've been in line for an hour, nor are they saying that you can't just go to a water fountain in the school where you're voting. What they're specifically criticizing is any giving of gifts at voting elections. You may have heard of there being a lot of BLM marches that had where they were doing voter registrations and giving of gifts, and this is the kind of thing that they're trying to cramp down on, is any type of gift being associated with your vote, or saying that you're able to receive something in exchange for your secret ballot. The next on the list, if you go to the wrong polling place, it will be even harder to vote. Essentially, the main things being changed here is that if you go to the wrong polling place that's in a different county, then you're still able to complete your provisional ballot. If you go to the wrong polling place in your county, and it's before 5 p.m., if you remember, you have till 7 p.m., then you have to go to your correct polling place, which, assuming you went to the, your old one or something, it should just be, at most a drive, within, down the street, because, you have multiple polling places. You might be in a small town that has 2 places to poll or whatever. However, if you come after 5 p.m., you're still able to do the old process of doing a provisional ballot. Essentially, if you're not able to get to your proper polling place within the 2 hours, then as far as I'm concerned, you're not even caring enough to vote, and I don't care. If election problems arise, a common occurrence, it's now more difficult to extend voting hours. We're going to look specifically at the language of the law. Poll hours at a precinct may be extended only by order of a judge or of the Superior Court of the county in which the precinct located upon good cause shows by clear and convincing evidence that persons were unable to vote at a precinct during a specific period or periods of time. Poll hours shall not be extended longer than the total amount of time during which persons were unable to vote at such precinct. Any order extending poll hours at a precinct beyond 9 p.m. shall be by written order with specific findings of facts supporting such extension. You may have remembered there being the quote-unquote water leak at one of the polling locations, and this is essentially just a lockdown on what was happening there. What they are trying to say that if there's some emergency that happens at a particular voting location, one, you have to provide proof that that issue happened. I'm assuming something like the water bill or pictures of the event would suffice in this place. However, also, let's say that made it so you can't vote for 2 hours. You're not allowed to then just give people an extra day to be doing their voting. They're setting out the clear timetable of how to deal with a emergency. As far as I'm aware, there weren't actual rules on the book for how to deal with emergencies before this. However, I didn't dive too much into that. With a mix of changes to vote counting, high turnout elections will probably mean long wait for results. Beginning, essentially what they're just going into here is that there has to be a proper way for how to evaluate the votes. One of the main paragraphs here is at least 3 persons who are registrars, deputy registrars, poll workers, or absentee ballot clerks must be present before commencing, and 3 persons who are registrars, deputy registrars, or absentee ballot clerks shall be present at all times while the absentee ballot envelopes are being opened and absentee ballots are being scanned. The part that was scratched out, which is what's essentially being removed, after opening the outer ballots, the ballot shall be safely and secured storage unit in time for tabulating such ballots. Essentially what they're saying is that the 3 individuals that are the ones responsible for looking over a ballot are the ones responsible for looking over the ballot. This seems quite obvious to me that we want there to be some type of individual who's accountable in case ballots go missing, in case there's some type of misconduct that's found, or if we're just trying to figure out who's actually responsible for particular votes. Election officials can no longer accept third-party funding, and as far as they say that this nods to right-wing conspiracy theories. As far as I'm concerned, that's perfectly fine to have. If we should make it very clear that no election official should be bribed. I don't know why this is being considered voter suppression. This seems like the kind of thing that anyone that's against fascism should be really promoting, that there's a separation between third parties, which is generally businesses, and our elections. So I don't know what the complaint is there. With an eye towards voter fraud, the state attorney general will manage an election hotline. And the Attorney General shall have the authority to establish and maintain a telephone hotline for the use of electors of the state to file complaints and allegations of voter intimidation and illegal election activities. Such hotlines shall, in addition to complaints and reports from identified persons, also accept anonymous tips regarding voter intimidation and election fraud. I'm personally more concerned that this wasn't something they already had before. One of the major complaints I know some people have is being harassed at voting locations. We specifically looked at the gift issue further up in the bill, and it would be something like someone coming up to you. We saw in Philadelphia the people that said, like, here's how you want to vote, and those types of papers being handed out on voting locations. So as far as I'm concerned, this is another good policy to have, that there's some way to report voter intimidation, and that should be a good thing. The legislature has more control over the state election board. There's created a state board to be known as the state election board, to be comprised of a chairperson elected by the General Assembly, an elector to be elected by a majority vote of the Senate of the General Assembly at its regular session. La-di-la-di-la-da. They just go into how this particular organization forms. The one thing that they're complaining about is that it's no longer the Secretary of State that votes this individual in, but the legislator. The legislator is voted on in a democratic manner by the people, where the Secretary of State is a appointed position. So what this essentially does is makes it so the legislator is the one that chooses the chairperson rather than the governor. As far as I'm concerned, it's a bit more democratic that way, but I don't know why we would think it's a big issue for the legislator to now oversee something that was beforehand the governor's responsibility. The Secretary of State is removed as a voting member on the state election board. This hits on the comment we just hit, that it's no longer the Secretary of State that holds this voting position on the board. Instead, it would be the individual that's nominated by the legislator. The GOP-led legislator is empowered to suspend county election officials. The state election board may suspend county or municipal superintendents and appoint an individual to serve as the temporary superintendent in a jurisdiction. Such individual shall exercise all the powers and duties of a superintendent as provided in law, including the authority to make all personal decisions related to an employees of the jurisdiction who assist with carrying out the duties of the superintendent, including but not limiting to the direction of elections, the election supervisor, and poll officers. This is once again just changing it, so instead of the Secretary of State holding the position, it's now the state election board, which is the legislator nominated. Once again, this is just the same exact powers that were already being in place, just being changed from the governor to the legislator. Runoff elections will happen faster and become harder to manage. The biggest complaint with this is that they're just making it so runoffs happen, I believe it's in 4 weeks instead of 8. 28 days after the day of a preceding General Assemblies. 28 days is 4 weeks. I personally think this is a good thing. This is more just a personal opinion, though. I think in the same way that it's bad for Russia or China to interfere with a U.S. election, I think it's bad for an individual outside of Georgia to interfere with a Georgia election. This was something that happened on both sides of the aisle. I know a lot of individuals involved in politics went down to Georgia to to play a part in the runoff elections. And I personally think that that's not a good thing. I think it's really disgusting for someone that's in either California or South Carolina to say how Georgians should be voting. In the same way that I think it's bad for someone like Putin to interfere with the United States elections. Leave Georgians to be Georgians. And this is a lot part of the New York Times article. In general, I think that this is all political theater. I think a majority of the complaints happening regarding the Georgia election bill is just in-group signaling, specifically on the left. And the defense of a lot of this really is just going down to some type of government discrepancy of who should be controlling things. I personally think that more power should be in legislators rather than governors. But that is a debatable issue, and unfortunately the language that's being used regarding these positions isn't a conversation of should the governor or the legislator have the power. Instead, they're just calling it straight up voter fraud, which in my opinion just dumbs down the conversation and makes it so it's not a meaningful discourse anymore. And this is your April 5th Not So News update. Once again, please like and subscribe if you're looking for daily news content, and have a good one.